Rufus B. Sage, an early Western explorer and newspaper correspondent from Connecticut, 1836-1847, wrote these heartfelt words of praise about the locality of Wheat Ridge.
There are few localities in the vicinity of the Rocky Mountains better suited for a small settlement or possessed of greater agricultural advantages than this valley. All of the different varieties of wild fruits and game indigenous to the mountains are found here in great abundance along the creek bottoms. The scenery in the vicinity of my camp is romantic, wild, and beautiful.
In 1859, miners came in search for gold in the diggings of the Great Rocky Mountains. They crossed the frontier on horseback, walking, and in covered wagons, following the Prospect Trail through the tall prairie grasses until they reached a creek and rivers fed by the snow of the high mountains. They followed these rivers, panning for gold, all hoping to strike it rich. Many of those miners, not finding gold, relied on their farming experience to make a living, settling in a valley along what was then known as Vasquez Creek. Wheat Ridge, Colorado, a community established by the 59ers, is growing to a bustling city of 30,000, 4 miles west of Denver, along the banks of Clear Creek. Before the city of Wheat Ridge was incorporated in 1969, it consisted of 4 separate communities. The first community was Wheat Ridge, which spanned approximately from Sheridan to Kipling and from West 26th Avenue to West 48th Avenue. The Prospect Valley community ran west of Kipling to approximately Sim Street and from 20th to Clear Creek. The Maple Grove community extended from Sims to South Table Mountain and from 26th to Clear Creek, following the agricultural ditch. Finally, north of the creek was the Fruitdale Valley community. It ran from Eldridge to Garrison and north to about 56th Avenue. In 1997, the furthest western boundaries ended at approximately Youngsfield, with a small section west on 32nd Avenue. Located in Fruitdale Valley on West 44th at Robb is the last remaining Wheat Ridge settler's home. This building is thought to be the oldest cabin still on the original site in the state of Colorado. The cabin was built by James H. Baugh in August of 1859 on a land grant from the Navajo Wars. The original cabin is encapsulated inside the Victorian house. Mr. Baugh was a quiet man and is referenced only as a member in several of the early organizations of the community. The Lees and Baugh Ditch, the earliest record of James Baugh, is one of the first recorded ditches to have water rights from Clear Creek. It was recorded in 1860. The ditch, built originally to increase the velocity in the minor sluice boxes, now runs through Prospect Park and is used for irrigation of the ball fields and grass. Further north, about a block from the Baugh House, still on the same land grant, is the Old Soddy, a National Historic Site. It is located at 4610 Robb Street and is the main attraction of the Wheat Ridge Historic Park. The history of this house is uncertain. It was built on the same land grant before 1864. Whether the Soddy was built as an abode for some early travelers or as a bunkhouse for the hired hands that appeared on the 1860s census as working for James Baugh is uncertain. The Botanical Gardens in Denver has determined that the sod from the tall prairie grasses grew in the valley. These grasses were all but gone after 1864 because of the many farms and grazing. The method of construction was a simple process that consisted of the builder cutting the sod in 18 to 24-inch sections, flipping the sod over so that the grass side was down, and then stacking it together. The sod continued to grow for the first few seasons, creating strong walls that were well suited for this area. The soddy as is seen today has been restored by the city of Wheat Ridge to the period of 1880. A picture of the soddy from this period was the guide that was used for this reconstruction. The ditch running through the property was dug by Mr. Baugh and Mr. Brown. It still has early priority rights on the water of Clear Creek. It has irrigated many of the farms in the valley. Up on the northern bluff of the Baugh land grant is a Victorian house built by Will Lewis in 1893. Mr. Lewis was a farmer who raised raspberries as a cash crop. It is thought that during the Depression, the people who owned the property took in orphans and gave them room and board in exchange for help with the farm. Across 44th and to the west is the Williams House, constructed around 1898, with a large barn to the back of it. When the street names in the city were alphabetized, Mr. Williams took the liberty of saving the sign from Henderson Street and hung it on his barn. Henderson is now called Pierce Street. Judge Samuel Johnson, who served as district judge from 1918 to 1942, left many narratives on which this documentary is based.
In 1881, when I was 8 years old, my family left Abington, Iowa, and came west. We arrived at the foot of the Rockies and stayed in a cabin located just above Clear Creek at what would be 48th and Teller now. My father and older brothers earned enough money that summer to buy another team of mules and some farm implements and household goods before we left. They rented a farm in Wheat Ridge from Jerry Coulihan. We moved to that place on January 10, 1882. It was night when we arrived and the weather was clear and cold. There had been no snow. We had been in an open wagon and driving all day, and when we reached the premises, there were no arrangements for housing us. We stayed overnight in a little log cabin then occupied by Charles Wilbur and his family. Houses were never too small in those days to accommodate a traveler, whatever inconvenience it might bring to the occupant. And it must have been considerable in this instance, as the house had only 2 rooms and an attic, and the family living there was 4 grown persons and 2 children, and my mother had 5 children with her.
The Coulihan cabin is preserved and is located at the Wheat Ridge Historic Park at 4610 Robb Street, the kitchen room being in addition to the cabin and not part of the cabin as it was built by Mr. Stevens in the 1860s has been removed.
When we came to Wheat Ridge, it was a farming community with probably 25 houses in the whole district of 2 miles square. It was largely planted in wheat, from which Henry Lee derived its name, although other crops were grown and some fruits were cultivated. W. Wilmore once told me when he first saw Clear Creek, he thought its name was a misnomer. He thought it should have been called Muddy Creek. The water had a dull, gray-blue, milky appearance caused by the dumping of mine tailings into the stream from mines in Gilpin and Clear Creek counties. The waters were so polluted that fish could not live in the stream. Horses and other livestock could not drink the water safely on account of the poisonous substances coming from the mines into the stream. The water was unfit for irrigation or domestic purposes, and much of the irrigated lands were damaged by use of the water. Many of the farmers resorted to digging settling ponds and siphoning the water off the top. The ditches were still clogged with the silt and sand. The damage to the land was so severe that it caused irreparable injury to the land in many places.
A few of the lovely old homes are still standing and reflect the pride of Wheat Ridge today as they did in early days. At 3703 Ames is a Thomas Birch home, built about 1880. The Birch family had about 20 acres of land at West 38th Avenue and Sheridan Boulevard, which they farmed. They built a 2-story brick home, which is the finest in East Jefferson County for many years. It was here that Mrs. Birch resided till the latter part of the 1920s. This large house is thought to have been built by Walker Whiteside, a well-known stage actor of the time. Reynolds then owned the home, and it later was occupied by the Godleys. This house is an example of the elegance of the early homes in Wheat Ridge. In the early 1900s, there was a large R under the front gable. The house is located at 6301 West 26th Avenue.
When we arrived in 1880, there were only about 25 houses in Wheat Ridge. At the corner of Sheridan and West 29th Avenue was a large farmhouse owned by James Richards. He owned the Crescent Flour Mills, the Rocky Mountain Ditch, and a quarter section of land. He had a family of 4 children, and they all rode horseback and attended the Wheat Ridge School. I remember when Mr. Richards' place was referred to as the most splendid country estate in the Denver area. The whole place was surrounded with beautiful walnut trees.
The Richard Hart Estate is now a National Historic Site owned by the City of Wheat Ridge. The beautiful light fixtures that hang in the parlor are reproductions. Wallpaper and carpeting are also reproductions patterned after the originals, which were found during reconstruction. The upstairs contains 5 bedrooms and a nursery. Mrs. Richard would sit on the balcony on the east side of the home and tend her mending while overlooking Sloan's Lake. Sheridan Boulevard was a part of the Prospect Trail. This trail led to the gold fields and was the route the first settlers used. As it proceeded south, the trail turned and went west at 38th Avenue. It continued on to approximately Wadsworth. The trail then went on northerly direction to 44th Avenue and then proceeded west to Golden. West 32nd Avenue ran from Sheridan to Wadsworth. It picked up again at Howell Avenue, which is now Kipling, and continued west on into Golden. West 26th Avenue was the poorest of all the roads. Consisted of 2 tracks in the buffalo grass from near Kipling to Youngsfield.
The first home on the north side of 38th Avenue was a 2-story home built by Harvey Stewart. Mr. Stewart came to Colorado in 1859 and made his way to the mining camps where he was unsuccessful. After serving in the Civil War, he returned to Wheat Ridge, farming along Clear Creek and later purchasing 160 acres where he raised his family. He devoted his life to agricultural pursuits for over 50 years. Mr. Stewart was elected to the state legislature, House of Representatives, and served in the 11th Assembly, 1887 to 1899.
Many influential people had roots in Wheat Ridge. One of the most well-known pioneers, legislators, and businessman was Henry Lee.
Henry lived in a small brick house on several hundred acres, which now serve as a cemetery. This home was just south of Tower of Memories. It is believed that he sold it for around $18,000, a considerable amount at that time.
In March and April of 1914, many articles appeared in Wheat Ridge News about Henry Lee's accident, which led to his death.
March 25, 1914, little hope is held for the recovery of Henry Lee, who was run down by an automobile 2 weeks ago on the 11th of March. His remarkable vitality has kept him alive since his injury, say his physicians, but they have not abandoned hope for the pioneer. William K. Milton was driving the automobile. Lee is 74 years of age and is one of the pioneers who made Denver the beautiful city that it is today. He might rightfully be called the father of the present park system. If it was not for him and his untiring efforts, Denver would not have its beautiful city park today. While a member of the Third General Assembly, Lee introduced a bill providing for the sale to the city, at a nominal price and without competition, of 2 sections of school land for park purposes. One of these sections comprises Denver City Park. The other was situated within the city limits and in Edgewater and took in Sloan's Lake. It was also in his initiative that the park board purchased the land for what is now Berkeley Park and Jefferson Park. Lee came to Denver in 1864 from Iowa, following an elder brother. For the first few years, he earned his living by peddling vegetables in the mining camps. Later, Henry acquired considerable land in Jefferson County, at one time owning a whole section of the valuable land comprising what is now known as Edgewater. April 1, 1914. Henry Lee, Colorado pioneer and father of Denver's park system, died Monday. The end came as a result of a blood clot on the brain. He was 74 years of age. An eyewitness to the accident stated that the driver was not to blame, as he was going very slow and that Mr. Lee became confused and stopped directly in the path of the machine. Lee was born in Iowa, October 31st, 1841. He was a partner in the Pioneer Seed Company of Denver at the time of his death. Henry Lee served on the Colorado Territorial Legislature when Colorado became a state.
Another noted gentleman in Wheat Ridge was Martin Everett.
Martin Everett was born in 1834 and arrived in Colorado in 1863 from Cass County, Ohio, during the gold rush. He and his family spent the first night in this area, camped where Sloan's Lake is now located. He first tried gold mining, but soon settled on a homestead which included 160 acres extending from West 32nd Avenue to West 38th Avenue and east of Wadsworth Avenue. On May 16, 1867, he called a meeting in his home at West 35th and Teller for the purpose of organizing a school district in Vasquez Precinct, Wheat Ridge. This meeting resulted in a temporary school building being erected on the northeast corner of West 32nd Avenue and Wadsworth. A more permanent Everett School was built in 1873 at West 38th Avenue and Teller Street on land that once belonged to Abram Slater.
That school was moved to 8991 West 38th Avenue, where it still stands, it is used as a residence. The next school was built in 1906. In 1919, a gymnasium was added to the school. In 1939, the western part of the school was demolished to make room for the new Wheat Ridge High School. This building was demolished to make room for the new Wheat Ridge Middle School. The business of educating the youth in Wheat Ridge has taken place without interruption in the same area since 1867.
Mr. Everett was one of the organizers of the Wheat Ridge Methodist Church. In 1875-76, the year of the Colorado Constitutional Convention, he served in the Colorado legislature. Martin Everett died at age 53 in 1887. The philosophy he lived was one of service to his community.
The community has honored him by naming a street in Jefferson County and 3 schools after him. The latest at West 39th and Kipling Street. Everett Middle School was completed in 1966.
Other schools organized before 1900 were a little-known school organized by James Baugh and Abram Slater in the Vasquez, Clear Creek Valley. It was District 2. The number was later assigned to Rockland School in Golden when 2 years had passed with no students in attendance.
Prospect Valley School, organized 1892, located originally at 38th and Miller, is now recycled and used for homes at 10135 West 38th Avenue and 10191 West 38th Avenue. Maple Grove School, organized in 1876 and located at 35th and Kipling, was later moved to 32nd and Youngsfield, next to the Maple Grove Grange. It was later raised, and the new Maple Grove School is now an elementary school outside the city on Elkhart Street in Jefferson County. Vasquez School, later known as Fruitdale School, was organized in 1883 on land donated by James Lewis and Jacob Brown.
The Fruitdale School, like many of the little farm schools, was not without its pranksters. One old fellow recalled putting a goat in a little 2-room schoolhouse over the weekend. The mess on Monday morning was a sight to behold. Fruitdale School, like many of the older schools, contained only 2 rooms. The school was heated by a pot-bellied stove located in the center of the building. In December of 1926, a fire caused by a stovepipe going through the roof destroyed the building and all of the furnishings located in it. The only thing to survive from the school was this picture given to Mrs. Ella Lee, granddaughter of William Lee. In 1927, it reopened in time for classes to begin in the fall.
Fruitdale School was closed in 1977, but is the only school in the Wheat Ridge located on the original site. It is now used for a preschool and storage for R1 school district.
Schools played an important part of the community, serving many of the needs of the people of Wheat Ridge. The Wheat Ridge Schoolhouse was used for church services on Sunday by the Methodist people on the ridge. In addition to its church duties, it was used as a meeting place for a literary society, farmers club, polling place, social gatherings, and the first Sarah's Grange in Colorado. The habits and customs of the people on the ridge were not much different from other rural communities. Being near Denver, however, there was a little more attention paid to style and appearance. Men generally wore beards, and women wore their hair long and rolled up on the top or on back of their heads. Long skirts and aprons with sleeves rolled were the everyday dress for working around the house and in the field. Special occasions found the girls dressed in the style of the day. The children were dressed modestly, and all were treated equally on the school grounds as well as in the homes. I found the people as a whole to be industrious, frugal, and loyal to their community, and a good type of law-abiding citizens. Home life on the ridge was not always dull and monotonous. We had plenty of work to do on the farm. When our work was over, we could hitch up our team to the wagon and drive to Denver for shopping or for recreation. We could drive to the mountains and enjoy the cool and refreshing mountain air during the hot days in the valley. We could fish and hunt as a matter of sport, while the women and children picked columbines and rested in the shade of some spruce or pine tree. We could visit our neighbors and listen to tales of early times in Colorado full of thrill and interest, and we can make our own amusements at home and enjoy our family relations as most families can do.
Continuing on with the people who were significant in building the community of Wheat Ridge, a mild-mannered, generous man is remembered fondly by old-timers.
David Brothers arrived in Wheat Ridge in 1859, purchasing 120 acres of land for his farm. A charter member of the Wheat Ridge Methodist Church, in 1880 he donated an acre of ground near West 32nd and Wadsworth on the northwest corner where a parsonage was built. He built the house on Wadsworth Avenue, and later he built the large brick dwelling on West 32nd Avenue, which he gave to Fred W. Oakes, together with 40 acres of land for a health farm.
The Denver Times on February 26, 1903, reported that Mr. and Mrs. David A. Brothers had presented a YMCA 34-acre fruit farm situated in the Wheat Ridge district. 26 acres of the farm had been planted in the fruit trees. The remainder had been used for general farming. It has been the intention of the YMCA for some time to purchase a farm for the purpose of providing a place for young men in ill health who need outdoor exercise, might maintain themselves in working hours so daily at tilling the soil and doing other light farm work. The 26 acres of orchard containing about 2,000 fruit-bearing trees. The trees are all young and the value of the orchard increases yearly. The terms of the gift are that on April 1st, the YMCA gave the former owners $1,000, and that each year, as long as the couple live, they shall be giving the sum of $300. After the death of Mr. and Mrs. Brothers, the farm is to become the sole property of the association. The intention of the association is to furnish tent cottages for young men who are desirous of working on the farm. Arrangements will be made at once for the establishment of a colony on the place, and the farm will hereafter be the outdoors headquarters of the association.
Mr. Brothers, a religious man, was always interested in the welfare of the community and took an active part in everything that tended to help his neighbor. He was intensely religious and practiced his religion in all his transactions through life. He, along with Martin Everett and Abram Slater, founded the Wheat Ridge Methodist Evangelical Church, first meeting in the Little White Schoolhouse, and later erected a building at Wadsworth and 32nd Avenues. On the southeast corner of 44th and Kipling was located the Jefferson Avenue Methodist Church. The Wagners, who owned a large house at 44th and Garrison, were major contributors. The church was built in 1904 at a cost of $1,500. It was later rebuilt on the northwest corner of 44th. One of the first Catholic churches in Jefferson County, and still standing, is located at 26th and Depew. Another early church is on 44th and Moore, the Clear Creek Baptist Church. The land for this church was donated by James Lewis, another well-known man. He too supported his community by donating acres of his land for the education of the children and worship of his religious faith. He donated the land for Fruitdale School along with Jacob Brown. The wise old farmers included a reverter clause which states that the land, quote, is given for educational purposes, and if such purposes are not used, then the land shall revert to the heirs and assigns. The school straddles the property line of the two farmers. Both families are included in the reverter clause. Berkeley Methodist Church was another church in the area that served the Wheat Ridge community as well as Mountain View. Don Wilson, well-known announcer for the Jack Benny programs, attended Sunday school here. It's still standing on the same corner at 43rd and Sheridan.
Long known for the beautiful carnation raised in the first part of the century, Wheat Ridge was famous in the late 1800s for another flower cultivated by W. W. Wilmore. The Denver Times noted in October 4th, 1892 edition, one of the most interesting places to visit in Denver is the flower garden of W. W. Wilmore on the Wheat Ridge. By those who had been out there, it is claimed to be the finest sight of the kind that they have ever witnessed in their lives. This statement has reference to the gorgeous display of dahlias, of which Mr. Wilmore has 200 separate varieties. A few days ago, a reporter for the Times went out to Mr. Wilmore's gardens to investigate, and at once came to the conclusion that the statement was in no wise overdrawn when it said that it is the finest collection of dahlias in the United States. There is an acre or more of them, combining the most delicate, rich, and beautiful colors and shades imaginable. Most of the bulbs are imported from England, which Mr. Wilmore says produces the finest flowers of that species in the world. Wilmore also grows poppies and other garden plants. He has recently begun cultivating a variety of trees for sale. Wilmore is growing hollyhocks and mums. The gardens are situated about 2 miles west of Elitch Gardens.
As a boy, W.W. saw dahlias growing over the fence in a neighbor's yard. He fell in love with the flower. Undoubtedly, this was an early start and influence which led to his life's work in growing, popularizing, hybridizing, and propagating the dahlia that made him famous. Shortly after the turn of the century, Wilmore was growing some 4 or 5 acres of dahlias, which was later increased to 7 or 8 acres, along with other flowers and plants needed for sale on a year-round basis. In the early 1900s, W.W. Wilmore and J.K. Alexander of East Bridgewater, Massachusetts, were the 2 recognized dahlia specialists in the United States. As a hybridizer of dahlias, he produced some 900 new varieties. Some of the blooms were as large as dinner plates. He also dealt in pom-pom varieties in his later years and introduced 50-plus varieties. The farm, well known as Dalmore, attracted people from miles around to place orders for tubers that were then shipped. The gardens were located at 38th and Wadsworth.
One of Wheat Ridge's most famous and popular fruits was the apple.
It's been said that William Lee brought the first apples to Colorado on a covered wagon, planting the first seedlings in the low area in front of his home along Clear Creek. Those first seedlings were all but washed away during the first spring runoff and were moved up and planted south of the Lee farm. Many of those first trees are still standing. Another grower of apples was John Tobias. In 1897, he purchased 20 acres in Wheat Ridge. Mr. Tobias grafted his apples and at one time had a tree that bore 5 or 6 different types of apples. Up until 1990, some of the trees in the orchard on West 38th Avenue were still bearing.
In 1877, the president of the Agricultural College, now Colorado State University, in Fort Collins, in his annual report to the State Board of Agriculture wrote,
About the 15th of January, 1878, I accepted an invitation by the Honorable M.N. Everett of Wheat Ridge, Jefferson County, to visit his place and view his orchard, that I might satisfy myself that fruit, especially apples, could be successfully grown in Colorado. I was very hospitably entertained by Mr. Everett, and through his kindness had the pleasure of visiting the orchards in the immediate vicinity. Mr. Everett's orchard contains about 260 trees, set about 16 feet apart and is enclosed with a good fence, and no stock had been allowed to run in it. Owing to the fact that many of the labels were lost while the trees were in transit, Mr. Everett could not give me the full list of the varieties, but said that they were mostly winter kinds, such as the Ben Davis, Willow Twig, Winesap, and Famous. The Ben Davis was the best grower and the earliest and most productive bearer, the Willow Twig the poorest. Mr. Everett also has 1,500 seedling peach trees and 1,000 chestnut trees in nursery rows. These trees winter-killed or dried out during the winter of 1874-1875, but started again from the roots and are now 10 feet high, measuring from 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches in diameter, and are very thrifty. The peach trees at this writing, January 18, 1878, show perfect sound wood, clear to the tips of their branches, while the largest are covered with fruit buds. Mr. Everett irrigates his trees thoroughly during the growing season, and as late in the fall as he can get water to irrigate with, watering his trees last fall as late as the 20th of December. The orchard produced over 4 barrels of apples of the Ben Davis variety. The past season, 62 trees were bearing apples. Having viewed Mr. Everett's orchard, he took me on his sled and we visited David Brothers and Wilson Perrin's farms. David Brothers' farm joins Mr. Everett's on the west and has a similar soil and location. Mr. Brothers' orchard was set out on a northern slope in the spring of 1875 and contains about 75 trees. We then visited Mr. Wilson Perrin's farm. It too is on Wheat Ridge. He was not at home, but from the thriving appearance of all the trees and small fruits, the farm is well adapted to fruit growing. The apple trees are thrifty and show every indication of hardiness and have plenty of fruit buds. There are about 300 trees in both orchards, one having been set out 2 or 3 years the longest. I should judge that Mr. Perrin dealt considerably in nursery stock, and from appearances should think that he had reset some of his rows with root grafts or yearling trees. He also has cherries which have been successfully cultivated. Mr. Perrin has the finest raspberries, blackberries, and other small fruits I ever saw, and he has been very successful in this line. Everything on Mr. Perrin's place shows the care of a master hand.
Wheat Ridge for many years was known as the fruit basket of the Denver area. One of the more successful farms was that of Emil Colorstrand on West 38th Avenue.
Emil came to the Wheat Ridge area in 1887, settling in Prospect Valley after marrying Hattie Lundquist. They rented 10 acres, which were mostly apple orchards. This proved to be a bonanza. The apples were abundant and brought a good price in the mining communities and on the Denver market. The apples were picked in the fall and stored in barrels filled with straw. During winter months, the apples were packed and sent to the mining areas and into Denver with the flavor and color still intact. Emil's daughter, Naomi, became a school teacher and later was superintendent of Jefferson County Schools. Naomi also worked with the rural schools during the consolidation of the schools into R1 school district. Colorstrand Elementary is named for her mother, Hattie Colorstrand. Abram Slater was another notable pioneer. He arrived in Colorado by covered wagon pulled by an ox team from Iowa in 1861. It took him from March 12, 1859 to June 14, 1861, 1 year and 3 months to arrive at Auraria, now Denver. After working in the Central City mines, he settled in the valley of Clear Creek. He preempted 160 acres with decreed water rights at what is now 44th and Youngfield, just east of Mount Olivet Cemetery. He built a log cabin there in 1861. Years later, the cabin was moved to East Tin Cup, where the developers had elaborate plans for restoring it. The company went broke, however, and before the cabin could be saved, a workman bulldozed it into the ground. Slater sold the homestead to a man called Hill, and part of it later became Mount Olivet Cemetery, which is located on West 44th Avenue between Youngfield and Indiana. In 1868, Abram married Mary Boone, a descendant of Daniel Boone. In 1888, the couple bought 80 acres extending from Reed Street to Wadsworth Boulevard and from 38th to 44th Avenue. Slater built a large new home and raised fruit and wheat. Slater gave land for the Wheat Ridge School just east of his home. The Wheat Ridge Middle School is there today. There was a huge cottonwood tree on the northeast corner of Slater's, and high school boys having avocations often agreed to meet after school under the tree to settle their differences.
We would be remiss if we did not include another crop that is rarely seen today, Pascal celery. This vegetable crop was grown on many of the farms in Wheat Ridge.
Spano was one of the farmers that grew Pascal celery. Growing this vegetable was very labor intensive. The crop was planted in early spring from seed that came all the way from Italy. In order to protect the crop, Mr. Spano would cover it with mats made out of cattail leaves harvested the previous fall. These mats worked like cold frames, protecting the seedlings from frost. Every morning, the hundreds of mats would be removed and the snow and frost shaken off so the sun could shine on the celery plants. Come evening, the plants would be covered again. When the celery was up in a full stalk, the plant was dug. The roots trimmed so as to leave a few to keep the plant nourished, and then trenches were dug. Each plant was then wrapped in an old newspaper and tied with string, then buried or trenched so as to allow the celery to bleach. The end product was a very sweet, tender stalk. Pascal celery was very popular with the Denver Society for their Thanksgiving meals. Many farmers in Wheat Ridge grew celery. The crop was harvested with the help of their families. The plants had to be dug out of the trenches, very often in 0 or below weather, and prepared for market. Many old-timers in Wheat Ridge remember this chore with not so fond memories. Digging hundreds of celery plants in freezing weather was not an easy job, but it provided for a good cash crop before the hard, cold winter set in.
Leaving for market before sunrise was a memory that Norman Urden shared with his grandson. His father, Robert Norman Urden, married Elizabeth Pitts in Peculiar, Missouri in 1888, and in the same year they moved to Wheat Ridge. Their first home was just east of Wadsworth, across from the then R.T. Davis home where the shopping center is today. The Urdens had 4 children. Their son Norman related the following story to his grandson, Jerry Fitzwater, in 1979 about his life on the ridge.
When I turned about 16, I was the one who took the wagon to town. This was done every day. My father and I would load the wagon the night before, and if the thieves didn't steal the goods, we would leave for market at 1 o'clock in the morning. It would take us until 2 to get there. We would sell the vegetables to the wholesaler and head back to the farm to work in the fields. My father also took wagons to town for other farmers. The other farmers paid for this service because it was better than taking time away from their own farming to go to market. There were a lot of thieves along the way. My father, or whoever was driving the wagon, would take a big knife or have another weapon hidden under the seat just in case he was approached by robbers. I remember the hard times, and there were plenty of them. Lizzie and I had saved up $50 to live on. It was supposed to get us through the winter. It was stolen. We had loaned a neighbor $10 the day before, so that helped out when they got around to repaying it. Lizzie went to work making crates, which she had never done before, and got an advance on her paycheck for the first few days' work of $2.50. With what we had been able to scrape up doing other odd jobs, we had a total of $19.50 to live on. But that was soon gone, and we had to resort to eating greens from along Clear Creek.
Norm and Lizzie had it pretty tough during their lives, but they made it. When times got tough, the people on the ridge helped each other out.
Colorado was well known for its dry climate, and many people suffering from tuberculosis came to the state in hopes of a cure. Fred Harper, M.D., in The Story of Tuberculosis and the Evangelical Lutheran Sanitarium, wrote that on May 6, 1903, 12 men and 3 women met to discuss providing care for these patients. They organized the Evangelical Lutheran Sanitarium Association of Colorado. They located 2 10-acre tracts out in the countryside for the proposed health farm. The purchase price for the land on 38th Avenue west of Wadsworth was $17,150. A beautiful large new house with modern facilities suited for the purpose of housing patients was the pride of the place. The second floor was later finished. There was also on the property a 5-room cottage and a good well with a water tank which supplied pure water. The board decided to purchase the best health tent on the market. It was called the Tucker Health Tent. The tents were equipped with a wood-burning stove, a good bed, a rocking chair, a center table, and 1 or 2 other articles to make a nice, cozy home for the consumptive patients. The tent was so constructed that fresh air was continually passing through both winter and summer. Tents were not only for economy, they were considered the best way to house the patients and provide fresh air for them. The Evangelical Lutheran Sanitarium Review in 1905 stated that, if the Lord permitted, patients would regain their faded health by breathing the excellent and invigorating mountain air, which, as far as science had discovered, was the only remedy to bring back robust health.
The people of Wheat Ridge were progressive in their attitudes and accomplishments, always thinking what was best for the community.
Fred Bunger, although not one of the earliest pioneers, was one of the most forward-thinking and industrious. He arrived in Wheat Ridge in 1886, first locating in the Prospect Valley area and later moving to a farm on West 38 at about Teller, acquiring a tract of land from John Tobias. Here Mr. Bunger raised fruit and vegetables. A graduate of Purdue University, Fred Bunger was well educated and businesslike. In 1913, he applied for a post office for the community of Wheat Ridge and built a small brick building to the specifications of the United States Post Office. In doing so, Mr. Bunger put the community on the map as the only community with the name Wheat Ridge. He is fondly remembered by some sitting in his rocking chair and reading the Saturday Evening Post. Mr. Bunger raised 9 children, all of which graduated from college. Bernice Bunger was the superintendent of Jefferson County Schools from 1913 to 1919. She is shown here in her new automobile on a mountain road, which she bought after her horse and buggy turned over in Clear Creek Canyon while visiting the schools in Idaho Springs and Central City.
Wheat Ridge's first post office was moved in 1989 from 7105 West 38th Avenue to the historical part by the Wheat Ridge Historical Society. The inside of the building was gutted in the 60s by a fire. The Society acquired the post office furnishings from the Foxton Post Office, a small mountain town near Buffalo Creek along the South Platte River. The inside of the building housed a replica of the Wheat Ridge Post Office, and a small research library belonged to the Historical Society. Many old-timers remember the post office with fond memories, not the least of which involved a wagon that the students dismantled and reconstructed on top of the buildings.
One of the more colorful pioneers of Wheat Ridge was James B. C. Boyd. His father, Theodore P. Boyd, and his mother, Molly, arrived in Denver in May 1859. They proceeded to Arapahoe City and later settled on a homestead along Vasquez Creek, Clear Creek. The youngest of the Boyd children, James, became the owner of the old homestead upon the death of his father. The farm was called Boyd's Crossing because the homestead straddled Clear Creek, the only spot where the wagon trains could ford the stream. Later, a bridge was built.
In 1911, the Denver Post ran a full-page article about James Boyd.
See that old log cabin? That's the first house ever built in Golden. My father and I built it there in 1859. Things got a little dull in the 60s, so we put the house on a wagon and carried it down here. I knew all the old-timers, Kit Carson, Buffalo Bill Cody, Jim Bridger, Jack Ryan, Scott Wiggins, all of them. They used to come here often. Yes, I've seen plenty of Indians in the Northfield there. Times there were 300 or 400 of them camped over there. But they never molested me, just went about their business.
Boyd's homestead is now Anderson Park. The old cabin was raised in the late 60s. The old house at 45th and Garrison was given to Boyd's daughter, Jenny, when she married Mr. Josiah Merle Winslow, along with 10 acres of the Boyd homestead. Willis Winslow was born here, and he still lives in Wheat Ridge on West 44th Avenue.
Mr. Charles Grawl came to Wheat Ridge in 1887, moving to West 44th Avenue just west of Wadsworth, where he began a truck farming business. Young Charles was left in charge when his father decided to go into the hotel business in Denver. He built the Tremont Hotel, which he operated for many years. During this time, young Charles built 2 greenhouses and in 1888 began growing carnations for local distribution. That endeavor developed into a prosperous wholesale business and a well-known florist business. During the 20s and until the late 70s, Wheat Ridge was known for its carnation industry. One of the Denver area's largest carnation wholesalers was R.T. Davis & Sons. Their original greenhouse at 35th and J Street was later supplemented by their headquarters at 48th and Independence. The Davises bought flowers from many independent growers and packaged them for shipment throughout the United States. For many years, Wheat Ridge was referred to as the carnation capital of the world.
Jess Taylor built a mansion on 48th and Miller. He was a wholesale produce dealer. It is apparent that then, as now, it was more profitable to wholesale farm products than to produce them. During Prohibition, there was a speakeasy in the basement of the home, where bootleg whiskey and gambling were enjoyed by those who dared to defy the law. It was equipped with a tunnel that led to the barn for quick escapes when the revenuers arrived. The tile ceiling is still visible. It is now the Foothills Academy School, and several other buildings have been added to the property.
There were several grocery stores in Wheat Ridge by the turn of the century. Smitty's later owned by LaFrance at 44th and Wadsworth. It was demolished June of 1997 to make room for a new commercial center. The Belial store on 44th and Miller is now a hair salon. Prospect Valley store on 38th and Lee Street has seen several uses in the past few years. It is now a potter's shop. The Smith store was a general store in the center of town. It belonged to Mr. Samuel Auger before George Smith bought it. Willow Springs was a stop on Prospect Road, now 38th Avenue. They sold bottled water from the artesian wells to customers to help cure what ailed them. Another important business in any community was a blacksmith. Gleason and Al Binkley were the first in Wheat Ridge, and then later, George Hively was the farrier and iron worker most of the community relied on for their needs.
We have visited the residents, farms, and areas of Wheat Ridge, upon which pioneers and farmers left their imprint. These were only but a few of those stalwart families that crossed the prairies, seeking gold in the great Rocky Mountains, and instead found a different kind of gold in the fertile soil on the ridges and in the valleys of Wheat Ridge. The city, in 1997, is proud of its unique atmosphere, mixing the rural with suburbia as it progresses into the 21st century. The tenacity and hard work of the early pioneers is still evident in many areas.